Could you use a quick tip daily? How about a tip that can impact your day? My name is Raphael. Join me as I bring you tips by experts around the world. These experts have shared their knowledge and wisdom with me and will directly share them with you. Make sure to subscribe, like, follow, and comment, and I would love for you to become part of the New Tip Daily community. Welcome back to New Tip Daily, episode 25. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm joined here by a good friend of mine. We became friends through my show, Coaching Call. Gino, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you, Raphael. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have an amazing tip today, and I think it's going to be a great tip because we're going into a new year, and what people do is exactly what you're going to talk about. They should not be judging, right?
Yeah, it's about overcoming the fear of judgment
Mm,
and general observation after I've worked with thousands of students at this point from all over the world and hundreds of clients in corporate settings and individual settings as well. That a lot of what is holding us back from doing what we want, from gaining the skills, from creating the life that we want for ourselves, is that there is some level of judgment.
mm,
And so the tip that I want to provide today, there's several tips that I offer in my online newsletter, but the one that really want to focus on today was a tip that changed my life when I started studying in the field of intercultural communication. It's really, really simple. And when I talk to you about it, it's going to make total sense, but most of us don't ever think about it because we're not conditioned to think about it. But that'll
mm.
change after the tip today.
Cool. I'm ready.
All right. So let me go a little bit in terms of why judgment is not beneficial before I jump right into that tip.
Sure.
Judgment is ultimately something called a meta emotion. So, meta anything is that thing about itself. For example, when I'm teaching communication classes, I'm doing meta communication because I'm communicating about the topic of communication. So, meta emotions are emotions that we have about emotions.
Mm,
And judgment ends up being a meta emotion as well as guilt and shame, which are often wrapped into meta emotions. And the reason that these are not productive or helpful emotions is that they don't feel good.
okay.
Judgment, guilt, shame feel really bad in our bodies. And we're naturally motivated to move towards what feels good. So, what
Mm,
that does is when we have any kind of judgment or shame or guilt, we go away from the subject that's creating that for us. And the really interesting thing is sometimes we are the object that's creating the judgment, the
yes.
shame, and the guilt. So, in order to protect ourselves from that really deeply negative feeling, we distance ourselves from ourselves or we disconnect emotionally from ourselves, which only amplifies the problem. It doesn't get us closer to that, figuring
Right.
out why am I having the reaction. So that leads us into the tip today.
Mm,
Instead of running when we feel judgment, shame, or guilt, that's actually the spotlight, the invitation, the flashing light to say, this is where I need to stay and concentrate. I know the natural reaction is to push it away, get away from it so I can ignore it, not see it, and feel better. But that's really the big teacher is to say, oh, I'm going to stay here. It's uncomfortable. It's not dangerous. It's uncomfortable. So I'm going to stay in the uncomfortable because then I'm going to have my enlightenment.
mm,
So the tip that I want to share is really learning to distinguish between fact and interpretation. And the way I like to situate this is referencing left brain, right brain, which is just a metaphor that is not an ideal match, but it'll help us to picture what's going on. You have a whole brain, right?
mm,
And yet the left hemisphere is responsible for, in this metaphor, the more factual stuff. It's going to pick up on details. Right brain is more big picture, and it's also the emotional side of things. So it's context, facts, and context.
mm.
Most of us live our lives in the world of, take a guess, which one, fact or interpretation?
Not fact. I
Not
don't
fact.
believe people. Not fact.
No. Most of us are living our lives in the world of interpretation. And it's a shortcut because interpretation is already embedded with a storyline, which is giving us a behavior and action. So when this shows up, this is what you do. And it's a mental shortcut that we can take faced with thousands of decisions every day, that we can just move forward with that decision that was pre-made for us. So I keep saying it's interesting, but it is interesting. Why is this a helpful tip? Well, because what I'm taking you back to is recognizing that when you go into the factual side of things, you get to be the conscious creator of your interpretation.
Right.
Humans always interpret. There's no pure fact. Like, I'm wearing a shirt. The fact is that it's a certain color. My interpretation of this is that it is a shade of blue, and shade of gray. Then there's an interpretation. What does that mean? Is that good or is that bad? Then you get to make that choice. Some examples that I like to give for fact versus interpretation, because I know that what I just said can sometimes be a little high level for people and they're wondering. So to strip it back, I use 3 basic examples. I teach about the fact of age. So I'll use myself as an example. My age at the time of this broadcast is 44. That's the fact that we go on. And yet you can't really divorce that fact from some interpretation. Is that young? Is that old? Is that middle-aged? And then when I said that most of us live our lives in that experience, is how we feel about that age of 44 determines what we do or don't do about it. Some people feel that 44 is old, and as a result, they treat their body as if it was old. They put themselves in social situations as if it was old. They hold themselves from opportunities to grow and expand as if they were old.
Right.
Yeah, so they limit themselves based off a belief, and that belief comes from an interpretation. Where does that interpretation come from? Well, it's surrounded by your culture. So you and I are in the United States right now. US is a major youth culture. The focus is on being young, and young is usually within prime reproductive years, that those are seen as when your greatest worth as a human being is. So if that's the message that you've been fed throughout your entire life and you've never had a reason to question it or rethink it, then that becomes your lens through which you interpret the age and the number, which drives you to do certain things or not do certain things.
Right.
Weight as well. What's the number? We measure weight in pounds. I haven't weighed myself after the holidays, but it's usually around somewhere between 165 and 170. What is that? Is that correct weight? Is that overweight? Is that underweight? And then you get the emotionally charged words of skinny and fat, which have been given connotations of negativity.
Right.
Yeah, and then the third one that when I work with students and clients that I give for them would be height. It's for men in the United States. It's also usually a touch point of how tall are you? I'm 5'8", so about an inch under average height. Our nonverbal textbook that I teach from says that 5'9" is the average height for a man, so I'm just under that. But I don't feel short. Why? Well, because I grew up in the sport of gymnastics, and 5'8" for a male gymnast is actually pretty darn tall.
Yes, it is.
So again, interpretation, it depends on what your community is, what your culture. I was a gymnastics culture, so in my world, I was tall. That became the lens through which, so even though the bigger culture of the United States may be saying, hey, you're not tall, you're actually kind of short, I don't believe it. And therefore, since I don't believe it, I react differently based on that fact.
So basing things on facts and interpretation, it's got to be a big takeaway for someone, right?
Yeah.
Because you even said it just now that your height, some other people may think you're short. Now, somebody who's shorter than you may think you're tall. So
Correct.
it's all interpretation, right?
Correct. And the point that I want to get down to is there's really no right or wrong interpretation coming from other people, because interpretation is subjective, right? Objective and subjective. The facts are objective. The subjective piece is going to be based on individuality. Beauty is subjective. Someone may want to set you up on a date because they think this person's really attractive, and then they show you the picture and you're like, no, that person's not attractive. You're both right and you're both wrong, because it's all subjective. So the interpretation, my whole point with this tip is you're going to interpret. That is the natural conclusion of humans. But I want to take us back because it helps us get over the fear of judgment when we strip it back to our own conscious interpretation.
Mm.
So what basically what let me take it back to the fear of judgment. Why is this tip connected to that? One of the things I coach on and teach about is public speaking, which is quoted as being the number one phobia in the United States, which is irrational
Mm.
because some other phobias like snakes or spiders or heights could actually kill you.
Right.
Public speaking will not kill you. So it's an irrational but very real feeling that people have. And many of the times those fears are coming from incorrect interpretations. So when we're growing up, we didn't feel that it was safe or appropriate to be seen and heard. We may have even had adults like our parents or teachers tell us to be quiet. Children should be seen and not heard. So keep your mouth shut. No one asked you for your opinion. And you learn through the interpretation that other adults have had that you should not be seen or heard. So when you strip it back to the facts, you're coming in, you're saying, I've been asked to do this public speaking occasion. So the
Mm.
fact is, somebody else sees some worth in my message or my delivery. The fact is, I am an expert in this field that they're asking for. The fact is, some people in the audience may really respond to this message and some may not. So you're stripping this back to facts, and then you can reevaluate for more conscious interpretation. Why am I nervous about being judged? Where is this coming from?
Mm.
Am I projecting my interpretation onto the audience and thinking they all think that?
Mm.
Right. So another one would be my sisters will, be like, oh, I'm having a bad hair day. And your hair looks great. You know what your hair looks like on its best day. And so, looking in the mirror, that may not be your best hair day. But from my perspective, your hair looks great today.
Yeah.
But they project, on to that. And now we reflect back to that person their own interpretation.
Right. One of the things about interpretation is if you're in water, you don't know how much water you're in.
Yeah.
But when you're outside of water, you can see, like if you look into a pool, you can see, oh, that's a body of water, the width, the depth, all that. But when you're in it, it's a
Yeah.
whole different experience, right? So that's the perception. So, Gino, you talk about teaching where in New York, and you are a professor. Where do you teach?
I'm at one of the CUNY schools. CUNY is the City University of New York, and my college is Baruch College. And
Very
I
nice.
teach for the Department of Communication Studies, which is an interesting field because most people, when they hear communication, they think of public speaking, which obviously I teach, since I talked about that. But that's a foundational class. That's like a 1,000 level, entry level freshman, sophomore class. Our
Mm.
field gets into really interesting stuff. I mentioned nonverbal communication, intercultural communication. I've also taught gender communication, communication for executives, business communication, interpersonal, which studies relationships like romantic marriage and parent child relationships. We
Mm.
ultimately study human behavior. So it gets really deep and really interesting.
Communication, I mean, wow, it is so deep. And a lot of people don't give it the time of day that they should, right?
Yeah. And I think the reason that most of us don't give the time of day, and I know this is going to be a profound statement, but it's a challenge for people.
Mm.
Most people are not ready to do the emotional work that it takes to accept responsibility for where they've gotten in their lives.
Mm.
And a lot of that starts out of our control as children. We all grow up in a culture and we don't have the mental capacities at that point to filter stuff out. We're just like little sponges. We absorb whatever we see and whatever we're told. We believe what we're told to be
Mhm.
true. So the deep emotional work of accepting responsibility for your own life, what I'm saying is, as an adult, we now do have the mental capacities and the emotional capacities, and it is work to go back in and figure out what you've been told that doesn't actually align with what you believe now.
Right.
So people would rather just pretend that the way they were raised fits who they are, and because
Mm.
it's less work, but it's less rewarding.
Right. One of the things about fear of judgment that I see people, they do things, extraordinary things, just so that they don't get judged
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, right? They go out of their way to be judged in a certain way, right? They have to kind of perform
Mm-hmm.
because the expectations that they believe other people have or they put on themselves,
Yeah,
right? And you said it, a lot of people, they're judging themselves, and maybe someone else is not ready to judge you, but you present it in a way that they're like, all of a sudden they're judging you, right?
correct. Yeah, other people become the mirrors through which we can better understand ourselves.
Hmm.
Yeah. You can sit with books in a library and study and know all this stuff in your head,
Right.
but it's not really until you're in relationships with people, and that can just even be friendships. I'm not talking about romantic relationships. Any human relationships, you have to be in context because other human beings reflect back to us. We get so much more data about who we are. And that, again, the responsibility becomes, oh, this stuff doesn't just happen to me. I am part of the process that created that thing that just came back to me. And again, it doesn't feel good like a meta emotion. If something crappy just happened, why would I want to accept any responsibility in what just happened to me? Well, because married together on one side of the coin is responsibility, but on the other side of that coin is power.
Mm.
So when you realize that you have responsibility in your own life, that's when you step into your own power. Because on the other side of, well, if I had a responsibility in triggering something negative that happened, oh, I guess I can have responsibility in also triggering positive things.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
And that's what we should all be trying to do daily, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And it is a lifelong process. So when you strip it back again to fact, we're not judging. Fact doesn't have judgment.
Mm.
Fact is what it is. Fact is without emotion. And I want to make it clear. I'm not saying live there because using the metaphor of left brain, right brain, we have a whole brain. You don't just live with a left lobe that has all of these facts without any kind of
Right.
meaning attached to it. But you strip it back to fact because the consciousness piece is when you are going back into the right side, you are not just traveling the same pathways, reusing the same stories that other people put into you, the other lenses through which you interpret these things.
Hmm.
You are interpreting for yourself what that fact should mean to you and what it does mean to you.
Mm. Beautifully said. One of the things that I love about you is the way you look at things, right? And I guess that your students are going to be so, I guess, filled with your knowledge that you are giving them a chance to explore their lives. It's not just about at the moment, right? And you said it's a lifelong journey that we're on. Something that we can take with us is that judgment, right? And we probably judge ourselves harder than most people judge us, right? Because
I
we
think
wake
so.
up every morning, who do we look at?
Yeah.
In the mirror, right? We look in the mirror, and then we're thinking, oh, maybe I don't like the way I look, and then we start picking different clothing. And you talked about the clothing, right? Your shirt, and just right there, whatever clothes you put on is how you're feeling that day, how you're judging yourself, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it can be a reflection. Though I'm thinking of my dad, my wonderful father, who clothing actually doesn't he doesn't put a whole lot of thought into it. He kind of just reaches in his closet. Maybe for you and I always tell my students for because I do an exercise on branding, which
Mhm.
is branding is deliberate influence of how other people will interpret you. For
Yeah.
example, I did not sleep with this shirt on, so I woke up about 7 a.m. this morning, got myself ready a bit, changed my shirt that I wear to bed into this shirt. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to present myself, use that word presenting earlier,
Mhm.
in a way that will encourage, its influence, encourage people to see me in a more professional light since I'm presenting myself as a educator, coach, as a professional. I want you to see me that way.
Mhm.
There's certain ways that we expect people to appear. But
Right.
again, that's interpretation because you go to some other cultures and they may interpret it differently because the
Mhm.
clothing has a different meaning there. It's really understanding with interpretation, stripping it back to fact. The fact is, I want to be seen as a professional. So now I got to interpret it through the lens of what's my definition of that. And then the bigger one is, who is the audience that I'm trying to appeal to and
Right.
speak to, and how might they? Since we're speaking in English, this is probably a Western culture audience that you're drawing in, which means that they're very likely to define professional attire the same way that I do.
Right. Yeah. And when you talk about professional attire, it's what we are taught that a professional
Yeah,
attire is, right? Because a lot of people hide behind their appearance.
yeah,
They don't truly show up. And they're like, if I put this on, like I put on a hat, I kind of tip it down a little bit. I put on a shirt, I put on a collar. So I'm kind of hiding a little bit. Like some people have longer hair, they hide their face. And you see a lot of teenagers doing that. They're
yeah,
like, I'm like, how do you see?
yeah.
you know? So I
I think
really, I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
my pleasure. If I may say too, you just made me think of a recent example. A couple weeks ago, I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art holiday party. I love the Met. It's one of my
Oh,
favorite
it's
places in New York
beautiful.
City. They put on this beautiful holiday gala, and it was not black tie, but it was pretty dressy. So we were all dressed up. Everyone looked really nice. But there was this woman, probably around my age. She looked to be in her mid 40s to mid 50s. She was beautiful. Oh my gosh, everything was just perfect. Her hair, her jewelry, her dress was stunning. Everybody would turn and look at her from across the room. So she was definitely presenting herself as a way to be seen. But
Mm,
like you're saying, some people hide themselves. What immediately struck me was she was not receiving any of it. She refused to look at anybody, but it
right.
wasn't with a like, I'm shy. It was with a, yeah, I know you're looking at me. That's exactly what I've created. And I'm not here to connect with anybody. I just want you all to admire me. And I think she's using that as a mask as well, but not in the traditional way. She
Right.
doesn't really want to be seen for the vulnerabilities and the insecurities that she has, because the way she's presenting herself appears to be the exact opposite with the utmost confidence. But a
Mm,
truly confident, truly happy person would never show up in that way. You would
right.
show up ready to connect and receive and see people smiling at you, which would naturally trigger you to smile. You're
Right.
bringing pleasure to people because of how beautiful your appearance is, and you're not receiving it at all.
Mm. It's, I guess the human mind, and you were talking about the left and the right, it is so complex. And the thoughts and the ideas and the perceptions that we all have, that's, I guess, what makes us unique, right? The human animal is the most unique animal out there because we do that. I mean, don't get me wrong, like if you get a flamingo, right, they're going to show their colors, right? If you get different animals, a gecko, right, they're going to change colors and
Yeah.
depending on the atmosphere, the surroundings. So we are definitely amazing creatures.
Complicated, endlessly fascinating, sometimes frustrating.
Totally. Well, thank you, my friend. I really, really love your share today. And I'm gonna we're gonna have a get together this year. I'm
Oh,
gonna give you
fun.
dates
Good.
and stuff. Yeah, we're gonna have a great time. Anybody who's listening who wants to come, we're gonna have a big event. I'm gonna bring tons of coaches, and we're gonna just have a blast.
Yeah,
One of
let
the
me
things.
encourage people as well with that. Being back in the classroom, we're finally back full
Mhm,
time this fall. And just, several of us were a little apprehensive since it had been a
right.
while how it would work, but the magic happens when you are physically in a room together. So if you're feeling that desire but not quite sure, I encourage you to really consider showing up in person. The magic happens there.
It does happen. It does happen. But you're at your mom's house today. I'm in my office, and we're not near each other, right? We're miles and miles apart, but I feel connected to you anyways.
Yeah.
Thank God for this technology,
Yeah.
right?
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful starting point. The
Yeah.
metaphor would be online dating. You don't stay online dating. You meet, sure, you meet people online because it broadens your ability to connect. But the goal eventually is to meet people flesh and blood, because again, that's where we're humans. We're
Right.
born of flesh and blood. So that's where
Yeah.
the magic is.
Thank you so much again. I want everybody to understand that. I do this show just to try to bring you these amazing tips, these amazing speakers. Gino is amazing. Follow him. Do me a favor. Please like, subscribe, and share these tips with your colleagues, family, and friends. I'd love to hear some tips that you have heard or would like to share. Reach out through any social media that I'm on and allow me to share your tip on New Tip Daily. I want to wish you guys a happy and prosperous 2023. Gino, definitely, I know you're going to have an amazing 2023 because you're doing amazing things. You are definitely someone to look out for in 2023.
Thank you.
You're making a difference in our world, and I want to thank you for that personally.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate
Raphael.
you.
I'm happy to do it. It brings
All
me
right,
joy.
buddy. Yeah, thank you. Have an amazing rest of your day, everybody.